Okay, everybody hearing me? Okay, this is the good distance. I think I can officially welcome everyone here. Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Griffin Sanderoff. I'm the co-chair of the Urban Design Committee here at AIA Baltimore. This is our 45th annual lecture series today, and our first actually in person since the pandemic began. So that's very exciting for us. Again, thank you for coming. For this year's events, the lecture series and urban design committees have partnered to explore the infrastructure of connections. The pandemic uncovered the true value of our time outdoors together and how we may have taken those spaces and connections for granted. Considering national conversations surrounding the Green New Deal, new federal infrastructure funding, and a renewed appreciation of the built environment, the 2023 AIA Baltimore/BAF lecture series invited speakers to explore national trends, visionary projects, and emerging strategies, both local and non-local, under the topic of the infrastructure of connections. Also, all events for this year's series are approved for 1.5 AIA and ASLA CEUs. Speaking of ASLA, these events wouldn't be possible without our sponsors, partnerships, and generous support. So we'd like to take a second and go through all of our sponsors. Our major sponsor, Maryland ASLA, our supporting sponsor, Delbert Adams Construction, our capital sponsor, KCI Technologies, our Corinthian sponsors, Swerno Building Systems, the Klein Agency, and BCT Design Group, which is where I work here on the 18th floor. Our Ionic and Doric sponsors, Mosley Architects and Whitney, Bailey Cox, and Magnani. The series would not be possible without their support and the continued support of our annual sponsors shown here. So just a quick disclaimer that our panelists have such impressive resumes and educations that it would take the full time we have here tonight to share it all. So these bios have been edited in the name of brevity. Beginning with Kate Foster. Kate serves as the Mid-Atlantic Director of Trail Development for the Rails to Trails Conservancy, often working out of their Baltimore field office. Kate is an avid hiker, gardener, and fitness enthusiast, and has been published numerous times in publications including Duke Divinity School's Faith and Leadership and the Huffington Post. Steve Preston serves as Park Design and Construction Manager at Parks and People, overseeing the design and delivery of park projects throughout Baltimore City. Steve is proud to be able to connect residents to new and reinvigorated park and green spaces. So far, he's helped reconnect 20% of city residents within the underserved Black Butterfly with these invaluable resources. Maitri Roy serves as the Executive Director for Bartram's Garden, home of the famed 18th century botanist John Bartram. Since 2012, Maitri has been leading the restoration and transformation of Bartram's Garden as a historic and cultural asset, establishing the garden as a vibrant civic commons, an outdoor living room, and a class space for the Southwest Philadelphia community. Maitri also has served as a landscape architect with the Boston Parks and Recreation Department. Theo Ngongong has served as Deputy Director and Chief of Policy for the Baltimore City Department of Transportation. He's responsible for setting the overall policy direction for DOT and manages several divisions, including planning, transit, sustainable mobility, and citywide bike master planning. Theo has also supervised and developed Baltimore's first complete streets ordinance and its manual in 2021. Kyle Leggs serves as City Planning Supervisor and Trail Project Manager for the Baltimore City Department of Planning, where he's been for over 25 years. He's managed the capital budgeting process, represented the department in the areas of transportation planning and emergency preparedness, and has worked extensively over the years as a district planner for Southwest Baltimore. Kyle is also a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. Klaus, who's our moderator, is the president of Arc Plan, an architecture and urban design firm in Baltimore specializing in community revitalization, adaptive reuse, historic preservation, and transportation planning. Klaus was named a fellow of the American Institute of Architects in 2011 for using his profession to affect communities through advocacy. Klaus has taught architecture and urban design at 2 local universities, writes the blog Community Architect, and is a frequent speaker at conventions and events such as this. So a little bit about our process tonight. Kate will be presenting. We will then move to individual panelist introductions and then skip right into the panelist discussion. The last 15 minutes we have will be audience Q&A, so look forward to that and keep your questions in mind. Otherwise, thank you again for coming and please enjoy.
Griffin, is it? You can cue it up. You're getting a preview here. Okay, thank you. So good evening. Thank you for turning out for, I understand it's the first in-person lecture series in a while. So in this long series of firsts, after what's been a rough few years, I am so honored and privileged to be able to share with you a little bit about the Baltimore Greenway Trails Network. I want to tell you, first of all, I am relatively new at Rails to Trails. I started in the end of July. And so I'm still on this learning curve, drinking from a fire hose of all the information there is to learn. But it's been a wonderful learning curve. And I want to share with you a little bit about my perspective. So before I actually get started, I am just interested to know how many of you, and I can't see those of you who are online, so forgive me for not asking you, but those of you in the room, how many of you have heard of the Baltimore Greenway Trails Network? Almost everybody. Okay. Who in here has never heard of it or heard of it when you read about this lecture and were kind of curious? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for being honest. A couple folks. Great. I'm so glad you're here. For those of you who have heard of it, how many of you are frequent users of it? Oh, 1/2 hand. Okay. That's good information. That's good information. Do you, when you use it, how do you use it? Recreational walking, biking, running, walking. Okay. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Great. Great. Thank you. So that's what I find when I've been going around the city meeting with a lot of people the past 9 months. A lot of people don't know about it. And so that's part of our work, a big piece of our work. Okay. We're still waiting on the, oh no. Here we go. It's always the tech, right? Oh, it's the sharing. Are we good? Okay, you can go to the second slide, please. Oh, I can do it. I have this clicker. Ha. Okay. So what is the Baltimore Greenway Trails Network? It's a 35-mile multimodal, meaning designed for pedestrians and bicycles and strollers and wheelchairs, network of paths connecting Baltimore's neighborhoods, greenways, and parks. What does that mean? Technology. I didn't do anything. Okay. The map is a little blurry but hopefully you can get a sense of it. So on this map, I'm not going to use the pointer. I'm just going to point. So on this map, the solid lines are the completed segments to date, except if we need to update it. I'm working with our designer to update it. So the northern segment of the Jones Falls Trail, which is up at the top there, that has been completed. So it should be a solid line. But the other dotted lines you see are the segments that remain to be completed. So there are 10 more miles to go. So we've gotten quite a bit completed to date. So I'm curious, when you hear the words Baltimore Greenway Trails Network, what comes to mind? Just shout out words, just the first thing that comes to your mind. Bike trail, hiker, connectivity, okay. Car free. Yep. Say that again. Green. Okay. I thought you said weed. I was like, oh no. Okay. Other words that come to mind? Okay. So that's what a lot of people think of when we hear about trails. We think hiker, bike trail, connectivity, great. Did you realize, though, that trails, these words are really small. I'm going to read them to you. Trails are catalysts for strengthening communities. So we say at Rails to Trails a lot of the time that trails are about a lot more than the trail. So I want to share with you a little bit about what we mean when we say that. So first of all, there's all of the process, which I know you're more familiar with than I am, leading up to the trail construction. So the planning, feasibility, design engineering, et cetera. And then we get to the trail construction, and the trail construction creates jobs that, we have to hire people to do the construction. So there's people who are earning money in these jobs, and that money is going to be spent in Baltimore. There's also expenditure on goods and services. So this is benefiting our city through the creation of jobs. Secondly, trails create or raise property values. And I want to be careful with this one because that cuts several ways. Okay, so it's a strength. We know that generally speaking, the closer a house is to a trail, the more its value increases when the trail is complete. However, that can also displace low income homeowners and renters, because as property values go up, property taxes then go up, and lower income homeowners may not be able to afford to stay in their homes. Landlords have to raise their rents, and that might force renters out. So Rails to Trails and other organizations that are working on trails, we're working very closely with the city and CDCs and other organizations that are working in housing to put together a strategy to ensure and protect that legacy homeowners and renters who are lower income are not displaced by this effect that trails can have on communities. So while it's a benefit, it can also cause harm to communities, and we definitely don't want that. So trails also bring benefits and strengthen communities by improving access to transit. They make it easier for people to get out and use their bikes or to walk to get to daily destinations like school, work, grocery stores, things like that. They also reduce the number of cars on the road so they can make the roads safer, and they provide off-road places for people to walk and bike so that they aren't in traffic. Trails are good for the environment. So the mode shift to active and public transportation is encouraged by trails, which reduces emissions. They also get people out of fuel-powered vehicles and reduce the carbon footprint that way. And then they also increase the amount of green space in cities and communities. And so it increases the number of trees and plants. And then lastly, really importantly, they can improve health metrics for communities. So we also know from research that Rails to Trails has conducted that accessibility to trails, so proximity to trails, make it easier for people to use them. And the easier it is for people to use them, the more likely they are to use them, the more active they are. And then you start to see health metrics improve. So there can be a huge cost savings for reducing disease, but there can also be, for each individual person and at the community level, improvements in health. Okay, so we are asked this question a lot. Why isn't the Greenway Trails Network completed yet? Right? I see some of you nodding or joining me in saying that. That is an excellent question, and it's one that I've been asking a lot since I've started at Rails to Trails. So we have 25 of 35 miles completed. Why is it so hard to finish the last 10? It's been really challenging, and I want to share a little bit about why. And I should say, actually, trail development is always a long game. It is not something that happens rapidly for a whole lot of reasons, not just in Baltimore. They take years to build and design and all of those things. And they need multiple stakeholders working in concert with one another to advance the project through all the stages to get to construction and completion. But there have been some particular challenges with the project in Baltimore, and I want to share a little bit about those. Okay. So one is distrust caused by racist history of infrastructure projects. So trails are infrastructure. They change the built environment. They impact the appearance of neighborhoods and the use of streets, of green spaces, parking, and sidewalks. And as you know, I'm sure, in Baltimore, there is a long history of harm done to historically Black neighborhoods by road, transit, and energy infrastructure projects. So the most notorious one is probably the Highway to Nowhere in West Baltimore, but there are numerous other examples. The trash incinerator in Westport is responsible for asthma and other health issues. The Druid Lake Park Drive, you can literally connect the construction of that road to the decline of neighborhoods on the other side from the park. So there's a direct connection to this infrastructure project to harm done to neighborhoods. So because of these infrastructure decisions in the past 75 years, which were choices made by people done to neighborhoods that have impacted and harmed entire communities, because of these infrastructure decisions, there are residents of our city, maybe some of you are among them, who have been harmed by these projects, whose family members have been harmed by these projects, whose neighborhoods have been bisected or paved over or flattened or polluted or isolated from amenities by infrastructure. So this ongoing harm done to communities by infrastructure creates this powerful undercurrent of distrust that shows up like that when you start talking about trails. Okay, so trails are often perceived in majority Black, and I say majority Black because we're Baltimore and that's the demographics. So here, as only being for white bicyclists. So I've heard that a lot, right? This trail isn't for me. And the particular thing that I hear in Baltimore is this is for white bicyclists from Roland Park who want to ride their bike through my neighborhood. That's what I hear. Right? And that is actually grounded in a dynamic of bike culture that is pervasive around our country. And while this perception is real, I want to underscore that the Greenway Trails Network is not a network of bike paths. It's multimodal. So it's designed to be used by people on foot, on bicycle, in wheelchairs, et cetera. It's not just about bikes, but the perception is there and it's real. So I want to share with you a very short excerpt from a book that I highly recommend if you haven't read it and you're interested in this topic. It's called Bike Lanes Are White Lanes. It's by a woman named Melody Hoffman, and it's very well done. So here's what she has to say. The bicycle is not an apolitical, neutral form of mobility. It carries with it a diversity of signification depending on its location in time and space. A set of two wheels can symbolize both community and conflict. Communication can either flourish as neighbors reminisce about their community bicycle event, or it can be strained as neighbors fight over the necessity of bicycle amenities in their neighborhood. The popularity of bicycling can influence the construction of beautiful paths and trails, but it can also be a signifier of gentrification. And that's very real in Baltimore, those dynamics. Okay. There's a lot of support for the Greenway Trail. I've heard a lot of it tonight from many of you as we were chatting before this started. There also is some opposition to it, and that's not unusual or unique to Baltimore, but it's very present in Baltimore. So along a couple segments in particular of unfinished segments, there's a very well-organized, very vocal small group of residents who have been really organized about communicating with their local, state, and federal elected officials, and have been working very closely with them. And so that is important to listen to. I should have introduced my colleague, Quentin Batts, who's back here. He's the Baltimore project manager. Quentin and I have been slowly making our way around and meeting with those folks because we want to hear what they have to say and understand what their concerns are and why they're opposed to it, and see if we can work together. But that has definitely slowed down the project, completing the project in those neighborhoods, because they're very well organized and have important things to say. Okay. Baltimore City challenges. So what I mean by that, I sent this to Griffin, and then I thought that's going to maybe not communicate what I'm trying to say. Trails have to be developed by municipalities, right? So nonprofit organizations like Rails to Trails or Parks and People that you're going to hear from in a little bit, we can organize, we can resource, we can equip, we can advocate for, we can help raise money for, we can champion trail projects. But in the end, the project management and the grant management and the construction is handled by the city. And while this is true anywhere, there's one specific challenge in Baltimore that I think has something to do with why this has been stalled. And it's not anybody's particular fault, but that is that because there are multiple agencies in our city that are involved in the trail project, it involves working with the Department of Planning, it involves working with the Department of Transportation, with Parks and Rec, sometimes with DPW, with the mayor's office. And that's a lot of agencies that kind of function in their own worlds. And there's no person who has been designated, who has the power and the authority to advance this project, who can coordinate across all those agencies. So there's no designated director of trails for Baltimore City who can sort of has the power to coordinate across all these entities. And then there has been staff turnover, both in Rails to Trails office. We've had 100% turnover in the past 12 months. So there's been some lag time as we've gotten up to speed on the project. And then DOT and planning have lost some key staff people who have been involved with this trails project from the beginning and have moved on to other jobs, like many people have done during and in the years after the pandemic lockdown. And so with that went some institutional memory. And so those of us who are stepping into those positions, some of them haven't been filled yet, but those of us who are stepping into those positions also have a learning curve to get up to speed. Okay, lastly, and Griffin mentioned this, but we need additional funding to advance and complete the Greenway segments and to acquire a segment of the Norfolk Southern Rail Corridor in Southeast Baltimore from Canton running up through Highlandtown. And that's going to require a significant amount of money. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that that's one of the challenges facing us. So tonight I want to ask, after listing all of those challenges, what if Baltimore could figure out some creative solutions to these challenges? What if we could put our heads together and think outside the box and figure out these dynamics and issues that have gotten us stuck and have prevented this project from moving forward? Maybe we would be able to tell a story like this one. Oh no, help me out, tech people. I pressed a button and it messed up. I think you have to start the video. Okay, thank you. So I've been told I need to wrap up, so I'm going to move really quickly through the rest because I have more things that I want to share with you. So it's not just Detroit that has been able to build these incredible networks of trails. I want to share 3 others really quickly with you. One is the Miami Loop Trails, which is going to be, when it's completed, a 225-mile loop of trails in Florida's most populous city. Connects civic attractions, beaches, parks, employment centers, schools, etc. The Circuit Trails in Philadelphia and Camden, New Jersey is an amazing network that runs through suburban areas, urban areas, along the waterfronts, in all kinds of neighborhoods. They already have 370 miles completed, 370, and we can't get 35 finished. And they're aiming for 500 by 2025, and they're going to get it done. They're going to get it done. Okay, Milwaukee's route of the Badger. It's hard to read those graphics, but it will be a 700-mile network of trails, 700 miles. 300 of those-ish are finished. Those are off-road, and 285 are planned and in development, and then about 100 are on-road. So there are other cities that are doing this, and Baltimore can have this too. Okay. What will it take to complete the Baltimore Greenway Trails Network? So from the outside, it often looks like all you need is money and a really good design and a good alignment, and then let's go, we can build it. But trail development, as I hope you've seen from some of the things I've been talking about tonight, is about a lot more than money and design. And even when you think about design, good design, as you know, comes from careful attention and listening to people and to communities. So if you look at a map of the Greenway Trail, the already completed trail projects, so again, it's the solid lines on the map there, are the ones that were relatively straightforward to construct. So much of the mileage runs through parks. So you're not going through somebody's neighborhood, you're going through a green space that already existed. Some of it does through run neighborhoods, but the ones that run through neighborhoods for the most part were through neighborhoods where there was buy-in and support for the trail project. So I want to share with you, so actually, as we think about these segments that we have to complete, most of them do run through neighborhoods, and there's a variety of support and concern about the trail projects in those neighborhoods. But we have to really think about this unprocessed trauma from infrastructure as we think about advancing this project, because this trail project will not and shouldn't advance until and unless we take the time to listen to the people who have experienced trauma from past infrastructure projects, and there are many of them in our city. So I want to share a story with you about one of those people. Not so long ago, I spoke with a neighborhood leader who has been a vocal opponent of the trail project, and this is a planned project that will be near his or next to through his neighborhood. So this person came to the meeting really agitated and ready for a conflict, and that's how they entered the meeting. When it became clear that Quentin and I were not there to convince them that they wanted a trail in their neighborhood, we were able to have an actual real conversation. And throughout, this person kept saying, they just don't listen. They never listen. When we try to talk to whoever about things we want in our neighborhood, they don't listen. Toward the end of the meeting, we were packing up to go. I had to get onto something else. Other people had to get onto something else. This person looked up at me, and they said, my family lost our home and was displaced by the highway to nowhere. And in that moment, the entire meeting made sense. They just don't listen made sense. The agitation and ready for a fight when we came into the meeting made sense. There are hundreds and probably thousands of people like that walking around Baltimore, and you may be some of them. You may know some of them, and maybe you don't, but they're our neighbors. And we have got to make space for acknowledging and processing the trauma and the harm that has been done to our neighborhoods and to our neighbors. We have to do that as part of this project and as a part of many other projects. So that, in my view, is the first and the most complicated step to getting the Greenway Trails completed. What else is it going to take? It's going to take building a movement of support for multimodal, so pedestrian and bicycle trails and paths, by organizing residents across our city in all kinds of neighborhoods to advocate for its completion. It's not going to get finished unless it's seen as and understood as something that this city wants. It's just not. It's going to take getting a designated leader within city government who has the power and the authority to coordinate across agencies and bring leadership and vision to getting this project finished and maybe even expanding it. And it's going to take taking advantage of the once in a generation funding that's available for infrastructure. And by the way, a lot of it is available for trail planning, design, construction, and maintenance. It's incredible, and it's literally once in a generation. Okay, so how can you specifically help? You can get in touch with your elected officials. If you're excited about this and you want to see the trail network finished, reach out to your city council rep, reach out to your state delegate and senator. They just finished the General Assembly session, so they should have more time now. Reach out to Kwesi and Fume and Senators Cardin and Van Hollen and tell them you want this thing finished. Organize other organize your neighborhood, your colleagues, your clients, I don't know if you can organize your clients, that might be unethical, but if you can, do it. Organize your friends, your neighbors, whoever. And if you're really excited about giving time and energy to this project, Quentin and I are working very hard to organize neighborhood action teams along every segment around the city so that we have a formal structure for neighborhoods to be a part of planning, designing, maintaining, advocating for, engaging with the trails. And so we would like to invite you to become a member of an action team for a trail segment that's near you. So those are our email addresses. We also have our cards. You can talk to us afterwards. Please let us know. We would love for you to be more involved. I'm sorry I ran over. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. At this time, we're going to call our panelists to the front. Thanks. For now.
You need it first? Or no, you need it first.
Start. All right. Good evening again, and thanks, Kate, for that encompassing presentation. So we want to go around and just you know, the introduction were short. I don't want to have a long introduction for each person, but I want to combine the introduction with the question, what is your relationship to the Green Network Plan and to the topic itself? What brought you in as a panelist tonight, and what is your interest in it? And we start with Steve because Steve has part of the history. The Green Network Plan is the one topic, is this Baltimore City document that is adopted. The Green Network Plan is more than that trail loop. Okay, and so that is what Steve can speak to a bit on how this whole thing originated. So, and then we go around and each one of you will, the second one is Maitre, and then we go to the two agency department folks to talk a little bit, you know, the implementation piece. We heard a little bit from Kate. Do you agree? Don't you agree? So that that will be the order. And then we move on. So everybody has like 3 minutes now for this first round so that we get to some other questions also.
Great, thanks, Klaus. I'm Steve Preston. I am with Parks and People of Baltimore. And as Klaus was saying, we have a lot of background on the Green Network plan because really it's an adoption of a plan that Parks and People started that was developed by Steve Ziegler, who many of you know, who was on our board and is a friend. So the idea of one park was that Baltimore is one city within one park and everybody is connected by trails, by parks, so that everybody has a 10-minute walk to parks in their neighborhood. So I can't really see what's behind me. We'll go to this next slide. So this is the one park map that Steve Ziegler developed many moons ago. And this is really a roadmap for what we've been working on for the last 39 years. And what I've been working on for 9 of those years. So everybody in this room is familiar with the black butterfly. Raise your hand if you are, if you're not. Yeah, okay, cool. I'm glad. So within the black butterfly, we've basically layered on a map to show how Ian McHarg studied things, right? So you have the most vacancy, the most violence, the hottest temperatures in the summertime, and guess what? No parks. And so we've been working on a strategy to inject parks into neighborhoods based on neighborhood requests, and always with community members helping us develop them from the start to the finish, so that we can begin to erase the areas within the black butterfly where there are no parks. And to date, we last year did 9 parks, which equated to 10 acres of land that were accessible to folks who did not have accessibility to green space before. This year we're doing 12, and that'll be an additional 14 acres. And by the end of this year, over the last 9 years, we've reconnected, well, we will have reconnected 25% of the city's population within the black butterfly that did not have access to parks and green space. So this is our impact map, and this is where we're working. And it's important to share that these are on city park land, right? So we're working with our partners at Rec and Parks. We're working on vacant land through Project Core, which I'm very hopeful will continue under the Moore administration because it has been so impactful. So working on vacant land where blighted housing was, or on vacant land or on land where housing is still, and working in neighborhoods to have that housing removed where it's a problem so that we can put parks in, because parks are really important for a number of reasons, which Kate outlined in the trail discussion. And then finally, we're also working on schoolyard transformations because many neighborhoods don't have space for parks. And really the schools should be their parks. And we're doing that right now at a full transformation at Cecil Elementary School, which is where all my gray hairs come from that you can't see. And also at Liberty Elementary School, Hamilton Elementary School. So a number of them. So over just the last 2 years, we've transformed 17 acres of park space. I'm sorry, this is the last 9 years, 17 acres of park space, $75 million worth of investment, and 80,000 residents who are now connected to parks and green space who did not have that access. And this all ties into the Green Network plan and the one park map, because you can't have a healthy city without a healthy network of parks and trails.
So it goes on to Mettray, and Mettray is from Philadelphia, and it's always a good idea to have some insights from outside of town. So this is what Mettray's role is tonight.
I don't think I need that. I'm good. Hi, everyone. My name is Maitreyi, and I come to you from Bartram's Garden in Philadelphia. How's this? Okay. So the Bartram's is a historic landscape. It's actually the first botanic garden of the nation, and saw severe disrepair over a 50-year period when the neighborhood around it essentially got industrialized and then lost all the industry after the Second World War. And then now the neighborhood is largely an African-American community that what we are trying to do is stitch it back into the life of this neighborhood resource. 50 acres of beautiful waterfront land. And when I first went to the Residence Council meeting at the nearby public housing, they sort of laughed at me because they thought I didn't know what I was talking about when I was asking them why they didn't visit the garden. And it was clearly sort of years of, environmental incredible injustices. The biggest refinery, oldest refinery in the nation was embedded right into the community, years of pollution. And this green space, I think, became sort of isolated itself from the neighborhood as a survival tactic. So in the last 10 years, we certainly are, giving a lot of, attention to the history and the context of the garden, uncovering a lot of sort of what was going on in the early 1700s in that community with Black families that we knew have been living there, but there's no documentation. And now really looking at as the Schuylkill Trail, which Kate talked about, it's the circuit trail in Philadelphia, as it makes its way through this garden, that it doesn't become the symbol of gentrification for the community. So what is it that we can be doing while the trail is being built to create connection to this garden, connection to a riverfront? Imagine a community that has lived prime riverfront and experienced the way. So sort of stitching the neighborhood back into the life of the community through paddling, through, fishing and so on. And really, I think trying to see what is it that the neighborhood wants. And when we talked with our neighbors, they're looking for jobs for their children. They're looking for places for kids to go in the afternoon when school is out. So we now are really focused on sort of workforce development and youth education. So much so I'm hoping that in the next few years that the garden is going to be a youth-run enterprise. And we have about 50 high school students from the local high school now that are part of our staff, if you will. So imagine that doubling in size and having that type of kind of investment in environmental education, in sort of learning about urban farming, learning how to run a greenhouse, learning how to, run a farmer's market and so on. So that's sort of the direct engagement that I feel is really essential to ensure that this trail, when it finally makes its way to the garden, isn't just bringing largely white people from the rest of the region into the community, but that the trail is a way for this neighborhood to experience Center City, great restaurants, museums, jobs, and so on, going out into the rest of the city.
Well, and Kyle Leggs is from the planning department, and the planning department is really the brainchild of the Green Network plan. And although you got to this job to deal with this plan only recently, if you could talk a little bit about the background and how this plan was so encompassing in the beginning, or it has in its adopted form a lot of complexity. And so maybe you can speak a bit to that also.
Sure. Thank you, Klaus. Good evening, everyone. Kyle Leggs, City Planning. So as Kate had mentioned, just to start, one of the things we are working on is an addendum to the Green Network Plan. The addendum is going to be essentially an updated version to the Green Network Plan that's going to specifically target improvements to the existing trail network. The Green Network Plan that we've adopted, I should say was adopted in 2018 under the then director, Thomas Stoscher, was a plan that looked at connecting a lot of the green spaces in the city, nodes around the city of Baltimore. I in particular was one who had the pleasure of dealing with a strategy that looked at demolishing blighted and vacant housings and turning some of those vacant lots into green spaces that would connect to other green spaces, i.e. the Gwynns Falls Trail, other areas that may have included, parks throughout the city. But I was very excited to work on that particular project to enhance the Green Network trail system. One of the most recent projects that I worked on was the Reimagined Middle Branch plan. It's 11 miles of shoreline around the Middle Branch of Baltimore, starting from the Masonville Cove area in Curtis Bay that goes around Cherry Hill, Westport, Ridgely's Cove, and all over to Port Covington. So it's 11 miles of shoreline that also is to be complemented with a connecting trail system that feeds into the larger trail network around the entire city. So I'm excited about that. Excited about the different segments of the trail. There's a northeast segment, the eastern segment, a southern segment that gets into the Inner Harbor area. So the challenge is, as you've heard earlier, is just trying to make sure we connect those segments, those unfinished segments of the trail system. And I'm excited about having the opportunity to partner with a lot of my colleagues who have championed a lot of the segments and portions of it up until this date. So real excited about that. And I'll just turn it back over to Klaus. Thank you.
Well, and then first off, I want to recognize Chris Ryer, the planning director who just came in. And you are very welcome to add something to this whole presentation here or our discussion. Last is Theo to speak for DOT, because as Kate alluded to, there are the various departments. And so when planning has a plan and an idea on how this network should work, there were also elements in the next round. We can speak maybe a little bit to that of resilience in there. So the planning department has this whole subsection about sustainability, and in sustainability, there is resilience that deals with climate change and with disaster response. And the Green Network Plan had node elements that dealt with those aspects as well. But with Theo is the ultimate step of implementation, because the stuff has to be built, and that is at the Department of Transportation. And maybe Theo can talk a little bit about this link with the planning department, how much you collaborate, how this stuff gets funded, how you prioritize, and all of that.
Thank you, Klaus. Good evening, everyone. So the beauty of speaking last is that everybody already said what I was planning on saying. So it's good to meet you all and have a nice evening. My name is Theo Ngongong, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Baltimore City Department of Transportation. My portfolio, and the reason why I'm here tonight, is probably because it does include planning, transit, policy, and a lot of things that the director doesn't want to do. So it falls under me. And that's just fine. Now, to talk about collaboration, to talk about the implementation of the 35-mile loop, just by way of background here, and Kate, you did a great job asking this crowd why we're not there yet. I get the same questions all the time. So within my portfolio, part of what I am responsible for is new mobility in general, and that entails bike infrastructure, that entails trails infrastructure, that entails all the scooters that you see out there. So all those programs that really are supposed to take us out of our cars, but into alternative modes of transportations are things that I manage through my staff. So when we decided to apply for a grant, the TA grant, which is Transportation Alternative Grant, at the Maryland Department of Transportation about 3 years ago, and we were awarded the grant, the concept and the idea behind us applying to it was to finish only the northern portion of the trail, the 35-mile loop. So we got about 6 miles that connect Herring Run to Gwynns Falls Parkway, literally through the northern part of the city. Those 6.1 miles were designed, or at least were conceived, but there was no real design to it. So we got about $360,000 in TA grants to push the design from concept to 30%. The intent was then to get to construction further down, but for us at the city to accumulate dollars so that we can get to that construction money level. So what has happened since 2020? Number one is, as we got the grant, we put together a team. We hired consultants to help us put together the design. And within the grant application, there were 5 different segments throughout the northern segments of what they call the Greenway Network Trail. 5 segments that all were supposed to go from concept to 30% design within about 2 years. The grant itself is expiring this June. We've done a few things to comply with the money that we get from the from the states. And where we are right now is that we have, we've met with the community. So we've done a lot of public engagement that unfortunately might have derailed the process itself. The design process was altered because as we gathered our design team and we started going around communities, we clearly sense opposition coming from many different people, opposition coming just from residents, but also from organizations. We had long conversations with Hopkins along 33rd. We had long conversations with folks on Charm area. We had a long conversation with folks in the Gwynns Falls Parkway area. Out of that, we went to the public twice. 2021, in the mix of COVID, we had public engagement via technology and all the Teams and Zooms meetings. Then we went back to the community about 6 months later in 2022, just to make sure that now, instead of doing big meetings, we were focusing on the specific neighborhoods that we thought could benefit from smaller scale gatherings. And yet there again, we literally hit a series of walls, starting with people that, as Kate said, thought that a trail is a way of getting rid of the Black people to bring in the white people that want to move, or at least ride their bikes from Hopkins to Gwynns Falls through 33rd. We heard people telling us that nobody bikes in their communities, even though this is a trail network, it is still perceived by many communities as a bike infrastructure project. And in their mind, just the thought of this kind of rhymes with gentrification. So again, we were also told that the team, and another point that Kate brought up earlier was that we had a lot of staff turnover at DOT. I look like I'm the last Mohican left there, but the reason, or at least the perception in the communities when they see a lot of people coming and leaving, is also that nobody really wants to do the projects, which is so far from the truth, but it's just perception. And then we had another layer added to this, which was that the people, our staff that we would send to communities, did not look like the communities they were serving. So, you know, when we hire planners, we don't hire them on the basis of what they look like. We hire them on the basis of what they bring to the table. But we were always told that the young white planners are coming into the Black communities to teach them how to ride a bike, and they don't ride bikes, and they don't want bikes. So all those little things, and again, they're little, but they have derailed the process for a minute, adding to the fact that MDOT has been asking us where we stand on all this. has brought us to this point where we spend the money. We've started now what we call the closeout process with MDOT in terms of gathering everything that we spend, hoping to get reimbursed so the money is not getting lost. But seeing Chris here, I would be remiss if I didn't add the fact that we did put some money in our CIP to continue the design all the way actually through construction down to 2000. Yeah, no, absolutely. You got to thank Chris for that. The planning department, they don't want to admit it, but they're calling the shots. That's the way it works. We ask for money and they say yes or no. We don't know why they say, sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. But no, to put a quick closure to this, I also want to make sure that we understand that collaboration is not just key. So this project, as it was brought to us by Rails to Trails, was initially a project that was bringing together the planning department, us at DOT, the Rec and Parks, the folks from, what else? There were Public Works. There were 4 different groups and the mayor's office meeting literally every Tuesday, I forgot, for over 2 years, just to make sure that, yes, there's ownership to this. And part of the problem, and I'm going back to you, Kate, is that there hasn't been ownership. We do part of what we do because we were given money to do part of what we do. The reality is we're not recreation and parks. Technically, we don't even build trails, at least in the city. We build, well, usually DOT builds bike infrastructure. We don't build trails, but we inherited this and we want to pursue this. We are all for it. We're going to keep putting money aside to build this. But I also want to make sure that at times we feel like this should be really some, there should be some level of better collaboration among city agencies and maybe the need for a real like czar, somebody who's dedicated to this, like in some other cities. We have a, bike director or something, a trail director. So that might help because leadership is key in achieving this goal. But the last word I'm going to say is we do want to get this to the finish line. I want to make sure that people understand that we have not lost money. So MDOT is not taking money away. They will reimburse us for what we've spent with consulting dollars. And moving forward, again, we will make sure that we have enough money in our capital budget to push this to 100% design and then to construction.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Maitre a bit more about how this suspicion that you are doing the wrong thing in an already injured community can be overcome, because the situation in Philadelphia is exactly the same as in Baltimore. And we heard from Kate that there is success in having a lot of trails already done. So maybe you can speak a little bit about the methods that you particularly used at the garden to overcome these suspicions.
Thank you for that question. I think what I'll say first is that I spent a lot of time in the beginning just meeting everybody and learning what the challenges were that people were facing in the community. And I think one of the first hires we made at the garden was someone from the neighborhood who has become like our main community partnerships manager, someone who has, who grew up in the community and has a social work background. And I got a lot of flack for making that the first priority in terms of a hire for a nonprofit that is caring for a garden, because we always need people for maintenance, we always need people for the garden and so on. But it seemed like that position was going to be vital for us to rebuild some trust with our neighbors. So, and that's exactly what has been really important and is what this person has been delivering. So she's been in this role now for 7 years, I'd say. So when I show up for a community meeting at in the southwest part of Philadelphia, I'm not from the neighborhood, and it's clear that I'm not. And so I feel like making those investments and having jobs, like jobs with benefits that are we have the agency to do. It wasn't a choice for the organization to do that before, but where you put your money and what you do with that money, like what you do with the land, what you do with time and the garden, and what you do with the budget of the garden, I think are three vital things that you have to kind of become really transparent about. So we created a community calendar so people could sign up and ask for the space, different spaces in the garden to do community events. We started to be much more transparent about the budget so that people could understand what our revenue was and then what we were spending it on. And then I think having the staff start to reflect the community has been a really big part of it. I hope that when I leave the garden, that there's someone there to take on the role that I've been playing, so that there's a transition to a leadership that's from within the community. The Bartrams, when they left from the Kingsessing neighborhood, they turned the land over. One of their descendants turned the land over to the city, but the nonprofit was managed by the descendants until the early 80s. So it was the early 80s that was the first time that a staff was formed for the nonprofit. And it's been since then. So for a long time, descendants who never lived in the community were kind of guiding the nonprofit. So now there's a chance to kind of change who's sitting at the table to make decisions. And I think that's the process we're in the middle of right now.
Yeah, it is interesting that you know, the participation and stakeholder process has to move from where you just show the community some plans and you give them an opportunity to comment on it, to really make the community being the actors. And so capacity building in the community, having community leaders have a structure that they can communicate. So investment in this trail system has to actually be more than just investment in the bricks and the mortar of the trails themselves, but it has to be investment in the people, that they communicate, that they organize themselves, not just in opposition, but in also defining what they actually want. And so the tripart of nonprofits like Parks and People and the community themselves and the agencies is, I think, at the end, really necessary to lift this over the hump. Before we open this up to questions from the audience, I wanted to ask Kyle, I heard that there are some recent good news about some acquisitions that you can talk about. Is that right?
Yeah, just that we are, there's, you might say, a long list of properties that the city is looking at to acquire to help achieve some of the missing segments along the trail network. We're in conversations with Norfolk Southern. You heard some of that earlier. That's a long segment along the eastern corridor. So it all sort of ties into not only just how to acquire those, but actually, you know, the funding that goes along with some of those properties that would need to be acquired. We are sort of blessed with having the luxury of working with BGE. They're one of our biggest partners in some of their efforts to work with us with properties that they've saw suitable for augmenting segments of the trail. So we're pleased about that. But it's an ongoing process to acquire. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Beth Stroman, who, when we talk about stars and people who champion things like this, he was one of the staunchest pioneers of this whole effort, in my opinion, that I used to work with years ago. And she would get things done. She was really someone who could find the money, could shake people up, could make things happen, and built a lot of the trail network that's currently there. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Thank you.
So since we are a little bit off our, or we're pretty good in time when we open it up to discussion now, right? Got to get the directions from behind the curtain here. So, and then we have to do this microphone game because we have a bunch of online audience too, and they need to hear what we're saying and they look at the screen. There hasn't much happened lately. So who wants to ask some questions?
I'm not an architect. I live in Locust Point. That bike over there is my transportation. I don't understand something here. Okay, I know the Greenway Trails Network probably better than all of you because I depend on it. But let's talk reality. Here in Baltimore, the people of Baltimore need things. We can talk about gentrification, we can talk about greenery, we can talk about exercise. I still need to go to Walmart. You know where Walmart is? It's in Baltimore County. That's where Home Depot is. My dentist, my new dentist, I don't have a choice. I got to go up to Timonium. And yet you're building this 35-mile loop-de-loop inside the city that really doesn't do me and a lot of other people, that I know, just dependent on bikes, transportation. We need to get to places we can use. So I do not understand why Baltimore City is not working with Baltimore County to make a much bigger and more usable system as, you know, a multi-transit area. Why can't we have this?
Well, I'll just note that, you know, there is a regional piece to this that may not have been mentioned, be it connecting north to Pennsylvania or southwards toward the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail. So there are efforts to look at that, expand that, and we have spoken with Baltimore County planners in that respect. That my colleague, I can say that he had reached out to. So I can say that it makes perfectly sense what you're saying, and I can only think back to the aspects of intermodal connectability with, you know, that bike being placed on that bus or light rail train, that car, that to help with some of that connectivity. Understood. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Amazing diversity of perspectives on a very important issue of connectivity, because that's what it's all about. I'm hoping that the greenway is not the horse, that the horse is making a city livable. So let's be clear on what is the horse and what is the cart. So yes, that diagram is there, but we really need for that diagram to be actualized are anchor projects that will build trust. It is very important. There's a proverb in Persian in my language. You walk at the pace of trust. Building trust needs anchoring projects like the Bertram Garden, where the people who have been harmed feel comfortable and get a sense of belonging. When they demand a trail, let's give it to them. Let's keep the horse, the residents of Baltimore City, in front of the cart.
I'm Davin Hong. I was actually a consultant for the Green Network Plan and also on Reimagine Middle Branch. One of the things I want to echo is what Theo said earlier, that, having a czar, I think we really do need a champion in the city. This is inherently interagency and crosses boundaries. So having someone who really leads the city to a common vision, I think is really important. But what I want to say is that in community organizations, community meetings, what you hear a lot of times is when you bring up something like trails, people will say, well, what about supermarkets? Or what about the crime in my neighborhood? And it's really hard to tease out a certain topic like trails when there are some really pressing issues, right, that the community is grappling with, and which kind of reinforces that we have to think about problems and solutions holistically. That it really has to be part of a coordinated, greater vision for the city that that is grassroots, that does address the needs of communities, and that has a clear vision. And I want to raise up the Reimagine Middle Branch as a good model, because I think it was very much a grassroots led, very clear visionary plan that was very much adopted by the community.
So, in a moment, wanted to give it back to the panelists for a moment because there were important points made, and it makes my head spin a little bit, because when Samia says, yeah, the quality of the community is really what should be the driver for everything. And then we're talking about the transportation purpose. And then we are talking about, this isn't just a trail for bicyclists. This is also for walking and for parks and connecting parks. And the importance of parks just came out in the pandemic. I mean, the usage across the nation of parks and access to parks and being able to walk, that importance has really tremendously increased, and people are realizing this. And then there's this. So maybe starting with Kate, because she had not yet had the chance to speak as a panelist, just as a presenter. You're with Rails to Trails, and there is this tradition of thinking of those as bike trails. And maybe you can address this a bit, and then everybody else too, and how we parse this out. I mean, what is our communication here? Are we saying we are improving the neighborhood quality of life and the health in your community by having more green space? Are we saying we are improving the transportation access? Or what are we saying?
It does make your head spin, because like I said, towards the beginning of my presentation, trails are about a lot more than trails. And so when you start peeling back the layers, it touches so many aspects of what it means to live in a community and bring amenities to a community and strengthen a community. And so it gets really complicated really fast. I guess I would say that it has to start in the community. And that's the only starting place, right? Is what are your dreams for this community? What's keeping you up at night? Do you want a grocery store? Do you need jobs? Are you concerned about crime? What are all the things? And the conversation actually has to start there. The part of my bio that Griffin didn't tell you is I am a Presbyterian minister. So this is a career pivot for me. I'm active. I'm a fitness enthusiast. I love running and hiking and biking and all of those things. However, I am doing this because trails are a tangible thing that can catalyze other investment for neighborhoods. And I've lived in Baltimore. I'm not a Baltimore native, but I've lived here for 20 years. And I'm angry about the disinvestment in neighborhoods. Everybody deserves to live in a safe neighborhood with access to green space and places where they can be active and improve their mental health by connecting with nature and birds and trees, and to exercise or to be outside with their families. That's why I'm doing this work. And it's not because I want to force trails on anybody. It's because I believe Baltimore deserves this, and Baltimore's residents deserve this, and trails can catalyze other kinds of investment. So I think that's what we're saying, is that this is a visible, tangible thing that that everybody deserves to have. But let's also have that holistic conversation about how we can fold other investments for these neighborhoods into the trail project. And that has to come from the neighborhoods themselves. And Reimagine Middle Branch is a great example of that. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you specifically, what is, when we leave this room, in your mind, Parks and People thinking, what is the headline, or how do we communicate?
About the trails, about parks, about all this? Yeah. I mean, it starts with community. I love what you said about the speed of how things work. Everybody, and we say this at Parks and People all the time, everybody deserves a great park. It doesn't matter if you live in Roland Park or in Harlem Park, right? And that's something that I fight for every day. That's something that keeps me up at night. And it's interesting because before the pandemic, we were doing like 3 parks a year. This year, I'm doing 12, and I think that list grew to like 20 yesterday when I had a conversation with my boss. So people want parks, right? And what's really interesting is during the pandemic, many of us in this room probably escaped to the shore, went, worked remotely, whatever. There are residents in the city who could not leave their houses because they didn't have transportation. They didn't have the money. They needed to work in restaurants, at hospitals. And they were quite literally trapped in their neighborhoods with no green space. And it's maddening. And it's no wonder that crime has spiked. It's no wonder that we have all the problems that we have, the challenges, because people don't have parks in their neighborhoods. So it really starts with, and every park that we've done is a request from the neighborhood. I mean, I can never keep track of my email. Many city people here probably know I'm terrible at email because it's always a growing list of what we could be doing. And I think what comes from this is that we need more parks, and we need to make the city livable through the parks and through the green space. Because what I've seen in neighborhoods where we've been able to do this work is the stabilization first and foremost, that people who live there want to stay there because they have a stake in the game, right? They've helped us pick out the benches, the trash cans, the trees, the signs, the name of the park, everything. I just heard yesterday in Upton, they're doing yoga in one of the parks that we made, and nobody did yoga in Upton. Same thing up on Salem Street. Ren in the back, who's a godsend, and I love to death working with her. She helped with this park that we did in Salem Street. There was a child shot there a year before we did this park, right? And Annie Hall followed us on it and said, I don't want a park that's going to attract drug dealers. And I said, Annie, just hold my hand, trust me, let's work through this. She loves it now, right? Every time somebody wants to say no to a park, she's like, well, you know what? I think we need another one. And they're doing yoga there now too. So I think all this said, it comes back to the neighborhood level, that if you work with the neighborhood and you gain trust, which is not easy, right? And you make that park theirs, then it can flourish around it. And then you attract the things that you're talking about. I think we would be remorse to not involve BDC in a lot of these conversations. We were just talking about this, to draw things around these trails, like the Beltline in Atlanta. I just rode on it recently, and I mean, they put us to shame. We need a Beltline in Baltimore. I think we'll get there. But all that said, the headliner here is parks and green space and investing in them. And I heard a mayor talk about this yesterday from Fort Worth and said, put your money where your priorities are. I think we need to, as a city, put our money where our priorities are in parks and green space to make the city livable for the residents who are here first and foremost. So that's my headliner.
I think, again, the good thing about speaking after everyone is that they stole everything that I was going to say. No, we need to build trust. We need to rebuild trust in Baltimore City. We, meaning city government, sometimes we are perceived as either the enemy or the implementer of our own plans. We recently won a grant to rethink of what the highway to nowhere could be. First time I went out to listen, it was called a listening session in the community. First thing I'm told is, you have a plan, right? So they're coming to us where we're trying to go to them to listen, and they already are not trusting us with the normal intention of just listening and wanting to understand where they are. Back to the network trail, it's the same concept. We are perceived as the implementers. So we've got the regular parks, I mean, the rails to trails, we've got the parks and people, we've got some community residents that would love to see some of those projects being implemented. And then there's DOT. So we are always that easy target. Is like DOT did not do this. DOT did not do that, even though we came into the game as the implementer. We did not create the parks. We those fancy drawings were done, in planning and everywhere else. We didn't do those. Other people. So, but I'll get there. Part of what I'm really getting at here is that, number one, we do have to set a vision that calls for the city's priority. So if the priorities are to build, a network, a trail of networks, we should do this, but it has to be up there with the other priorities, right? Crime is one of fighting crime is one of the city's priorities. So this has to be elevated to a level where it's like, it's a major priority. And then we have to rebuild the trust that we've lost over time, because we said we were going to do this, and then we did that without consulting with the residents. The last thing I'm going to say is we need to build, it's not just trust, but alliances. When we go to communities where they don't trust us, if we go there with people that look like us, or at least look like me, that actually ride bikes, now we got another level of trust that we can regain. Because when you're saying Black people don't ride bike, I'm like, I've got 100 people behind me that are Black and that ride bikes, and they are saying they ride bikes. So we got to build those coalitions if we want to be successful moving forward with a project like this.
We're coming to you in a second, but I wanted to insert David's question, and so then to enrich the answers, because otherwise we're getting sort of the repeat of, yeah, we need to build trust.
Well, I guess I want to say, how can we build on and celebrate our successes? We've talked a lot about the problems. And I think that you touched on, for example, you'd built trust in somebody who'd really loved your park. And so you could then go and do another one and another one and another one. How can we build on those successes? I mean, like that Detroit movie you showed, another example of the successes, and make those successes keyed to the neighborhood, so that there's a piece of the history of the real fabric of the neighborhood. The Detroit one had all kinds of funky murals and all kinds of cool stuff. Atlanta's Beltline has that. No doubt Bartram's Garden has built on those kind of things. How can we every year boast about, we just did 3 miles of connection and a park on either end that's connected? And I'd love to see you two guys work more together so that you're doing parks and you're doing the connections, but it's celebrating those connections. Every year we have something to boast about, so we get more publicity that works for us. I don't feel like we have it now. I really don't.
All right, so can you answer this along with the other question, the messaging in terms of the success?
So one of the first community committees that we formed at Bartram's was the party committee. So when it seemed food, like lots of good, there was amazing music in the community. So we would bring, some of the performers, there was dancers. So the party committee, their job is to do 3 like seasonal things. And they come up with great ideas. The whole thing is to actually celebrate what we accomplish every season. So I think you've hit on something that I think is sort of inherently important to human connection. Like if you're at a party and you're listening to wonderful music, doesn't matter where you come from, what your walk in life is, there's something you can celebrate together. So that's something that's become like part of the DNA of the garden now. That committee is like now telling my staff what they need and when they need it and what the event is going to be and what section of the trail they're going to do the event, because that's what's like new, or maybe they need more eyes on that section of the trail. So I would suggest in all of this not to forget the fun, because these trails are beautiful. These trails are incredibly empowering for kids. So the other thing we have is like a fleet of bikes at the garden that people can borrow and return whenever they want as families. There's never been a culture for biking in Southwest Philadelphia. So there's never been a safe place to bike. So if there's no safe place to bike, then you never have a culture in the community of wanting to be on a trail on a bike, because bikes on city streets are like scary. So we offer up these bikes when the parties happen or a movie night happens. These bikes are around so that people can use them to go up and down the section of the trail that's already built, so that they can, as a family or as like a brothers and sisters together, like explore this section and do it in a safe way. So the fun and the partying is like, has to be woven into your process in a way that it becomes a part of the culture of the community. You need party planners.
I'll just add that over the last year, we created a website, Baltimore Greenway Trails.org. So I think that's part of the solution. You've got a website, and the planner who create the website made sure that people on the website look like people who live in Baltimore City. A variety of users, a variety of sites along the trail plan network. And I think that's so important. So I invite all of you to visit that website, Baltimore Greenway Trails.org. But I kind of feel bad about, not maybe having an answer for your question, but I think that's part of the solution, recognizing that there are problems, connectivity problems, and, how we can begin to solve those individual problems to help, create a world-class sort of trail network system. So I'll probably get your information after this and try to, hope to maybe identify, at least bring that question to the forefront of the conversation so that others are made available, aware of that particular issue. So I'll add to that as part of our design, in-house design standards, when we look at developers coming in to develop, be it along the waterfront, whatever we do now, look at how we can mitigate, let's say, developments over 5,000 square feet, that they have perhaps a plan in place or some sort of idea in mind about how maybe a waterfront promenade could be developed. And so that's one of our goals, to help, sort of shepherd design guidelines to deal with other segments along the trail. So thank you.
So are there any last important, one last question? Well, we have 2, but maybe short, Franz.
Hi, you all spoke about the safeguards that are in place that allow people who have been in the communities where you want to run trails for years to not be at risk from the improvement. Can you speak about some of those safeguards?
Let's just wrap the other question in also quickly.
Mine is also about safeguards, but more like physical. There's a lot of people that won't use the trails because they're scared they will get run over by cars, which has happened to me almost twice this year. So what's the plan to educate the city on how to deal with trails and people that walk and bike on them so that they're not as scared for their lives as they're using them?
Okay, first the safeguard. Who wants to answer that?
Did anybody else want to address that? Okay. Okay. Well, I am not aware of any in place right now, but I'm working very closely. In fact, I just met with Director Ryer 2 days ago to talk about this. I've been working very closely with a variety of folks in the city and with some nonprofit housing agencies and community development corporations. And I'm trying to find funding to pull together a project team to put together an equitable development strategy so that we can put some of these safeguards in place. So there's lots of precedent in other cities. The 11th Street Bridge project is a great example of that, but my colleague, Willie Caritis in Milwaukee is working really closely with a team very similar for a trail project through the center of Milwaukee to ensure these things. So there are creative solutions like community land trusts that can protect legacy homeowners and renters from being displaced. And so that's my hope and dream, and I'm working really hard to get there. So if you have more questions or are interested in being a part of it, let's talk.
I was going to say locally, a great example is Johnson Square in the East Side. Regina Hammond, she should definitely run for something or get an award. She has led Rebuild Johnson Square. She's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. And as we've built parks there, we're building parks hand in hand with Rebuild Johnson Square. So we, Parks and People, is a Johnson Square partner. We work closely with planning. We work closely with Director Kennedy from housing, all to make sure that residents are not displaced. So there's an LDA that's been created for Johnson Square that they have as a neighborhood the say on who comes in and develops and who does not. And the plans are presented to them. And so that's a great tool and a great model I think could be replicated across the city to ensure that residents aren't pushed out. I think too, to Kate's point, it's really important to have those residents on the ground floor. And that's why I feel very lucky every day that we have residents who invite us in to do these projects, because that's the important piece to make sure that residents aren't displaced. And it's a lot of education too, right? Bringing in the tools to say, if a trail's built or a park's built, they worry their taxes will go up. Yes, your taxes might go up, your property value might go up. And this is why that is good, right? These are the tools that are in place to make sure that you're not displaced. If your housing value goes up, then that means more equity in your pocket that you did not previously have. And I think it's a lot of that education piece that we have to do in our work to push that out to residents so that they're fully aware that this thing is going to benefit them in a way that they are not previously aware of.
And finally, the safety question, not the safeguard, but the safety, the actual physical safety of an active transportation participant as a pedestrian, as a bicyclist. It's dangerous in Baltimore. I mean, I bicycled since I was 10 or something in cities, but lately I got really scared because the aggression on the roads is so high and the police is not enforcing anything anymore. So how can we create the safety?
It's funny, were you asking me that question or was that someone else? Klaus, I think there is one thing that is clear in Baltimore City. So behavior is part of the issue here. I've got 2 kids in college now, but they learn how to drive here in the city. And I was scared every time they were behind the wheels, period. And this is just the Baltimore thing. So behavior, the driver's behavior is part of the reason why we see a lot of crashes. So there's that. Then we don't build trails at DOT, we build bike infrastructure. So it's a little bit different. And I'm saying this just to give you a little bit of context, because I would rather have them talk about safety measures around trails, because they usually happen in areas that are not urban. So within the right of ways, within what we own, we try to design bike infrastructure that is as safe as possible. And so we've moved from reducing the travel lanes, doing what we call the road diet, to actually moving to getting closer to dedicated bike lanes that are separated from the actual travel lanes. We have a plan for this. So after we get our master plan adopted in 2015, part of what we did 2 years later was to create a separated bike network, specifically to connect areas that are not connected yet to our kind of like a network of trails, but more importantly, that are safe enough for people to ride on, as long as they are separated from where the drivers drive. So it's we have that in plans. Part of what we need to do is implement it. Part of the implementation comes with money. And we are trying to be more innovative about where and how to get the money to finally at some point implement our separated bike network, because that would address this safety issue in the best way we can do it, like separating the modes, right? And on our complete street manual, we have clearly indicated that when you look at modal split, you can get modal hierarchy. The pedestrian are first, the bicyclists are second, transit is third, the cars are fourth, and then the fifth is the truck. So we really want to make sure that misses are missed, right? Close misses are missed. So we are in this together. Safety is part of what we do, but I'm also saying we are limited in our resources. So if you know where to find the money, let me know.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, audience. Thank you, audience in the space. And thank you, panelists. And a round of applause for the panelists. So the virtual audience will probably say goodbye, and the physical audience gets rewarded. And Griffin is going to say a few more words about the other things that come out.
Just a few last words. Thank you all very much for being here. We super appreciate it. Thank you everyone for coming. Just a quick word about UDC, the Urban Design Committee. If you liked what you heard tonight, if you want to have conversations like this, we are citizen architects, planners, designers who advocate for projects that we care about. So if that sounds like you, please reach out. Zoom audience, thank you for coming. We will turn that off soon, and let's get to the food.